Hi, everybody. This is Amy Baer, board president of WIF. Thank you for joining us tonight. We are here with an incredible panel of producers who all happen to be kick-ass women, but they're producers first. And we're going to be talking to them about female producers seizing the moment this year. We're joined today in no particular order because they're all amazing. We're joined today by Mollye Asher, producer of NOMADLAND, Lyn Sisson-Talbert, producer of Jingle Jangle, A Christmas Journey, Monica Levinson, producer of BORAT Subsequent Movie Film, Christina Oh, producer of MINARI, and Jessica Wu Calder, producer of One Night in Miami. Thank you all for joining us tonight. Two of our guests are actually on location and are in either base camp or in a trailer, making the time to talk to us and to all of you. So we are very, very grateful for that. So I'm going to just start with a couple of general questions, and then we can move into more specific stuff about your movies this year, all of which are remarkable, and congratulations to all of you. They're amazing. Let's talk about there are more women producers than ever before on an Oscar trajectory this year. How do we maintain that momentum? What do you think accounts for that? And you can all just jump in here. So I'm going to put my friend Monica on the spot and let her start because I can lean on her that way since we made a movie together. But Monica, what do you think about that? Like, what's the trajectory? How do we account for that?
Well, I think women are just being more inclusive with other women. We're all sort of joining forces and saying, let's go make these movies. And I don't know. I think women make really good producers also. I think we are, not only creative, but also have attention to detail and know how to juggle and manage things. And I think it feels like a natural path that the industry is just catching up to.
Really well put. Anybody else want to ring in on that? I mean, what you're feeling in this sort of peculiar award season?
I would agree with Monica. It's the whole being a woman, being able to micromanage moms, wives, partners. I mean, you name it. And we always have to multitask. So it definitely lends itself to being a great producer. And I also feel the type of movies that people are drawn to now as well, and you can tell that it has that female touch, underlying in the storylines and in the films and the messages that we're trying to put out there in the ether. So I feel like those movies are jumping out and getting the recognition. Therefore, you get to see who's really behind the scenes helping bring these things to life.
Yeah, that's such a good point because women tend to make, movies about women, right? They employ women, they tell stories about women. And, I know with Monica, who was gracious enough to speak in a class I'm teaching this semester, talked about the impact of Borat's daughter and how, as crazy as a component of that movie as it is, that was really something that resonated. And now she's getting a lot of awards attention for it.
Right. I mean, that was absolutely why, the angle in was going in through feminism and through what we've all been through in the last, obviously lifetime, but in the last several years, we've, the Me Too movement came forward, and we were able to really take a look at the fact that we were still litigating women's rights in this country, and we needed to do something about that. And I think, that's why the character of Tutar was so important to us as we made that journey to make Borat a feminist.
Well, that brings up that ties into the next question I wanted to ask all of you. To what extent do you all feel like being a woman, and in particular a woman of color, has had an impact on your trajectory as a woman producer? Has it helped? Has it been a hindrance? What are the hurdles that you feel like you faced that you shouldn't have faced, or that you didn't see other male peers facing? Because I think there is this moment now post Me Too where there is at least a consciousness of, oh, Ooh, yeah, there's a lot of white guys producing movies, directing movies, writing movies and television. Excuse me. Are you aware of a change in the trajectory of your career pre that moment in time and now where we are?
Well,
Uh,
I know for me, it took 20 years to bring Jingle Jangle to life. And it started with it being, a cast of, African Americans. And would someone invest in a project like that with the spectacle and fantasy of it all that had a leading cast of African Americans? And that was what was so tough to get someone to say yes to. And then on the flip side of it to have this female protagonist, pushing the story forward. So I can say firsthand that yes, that was extremely difficult to try to get it made and get it done. And it took a shift and change, like Monica had mentioned, that for people to say now's the time, like this must be done now, and for us to also push it from our end. So I definitely feel that because of this shift and change, it's made it so we can push these things forward now.
Interesting. Molly and Christina and Jessica, have you felt that on your projects recently, and where the trajectory of your career as producers had some sort of a different energy behind it that helped get these movies in particular made, but in general for your careers?
well, I think that I probably have a very unique perspective on this because I produce with my husband, who is a white male. So basically, my entire, I would say, 20 years, I have had sort of a side-by-side comparison as to how the industry has perceived him versus me. And there were, I would say for the first 10 years, I would be at film festivals and people would go up to him and be like, oh my God, I love your movie that you produced. And then I would be introduced as the wife or the girlfriend. I'm like, but I have the same credit, I've done the same amount of work, and it just was not really being recognized. On top of that, I'm aware that I'm just also not someone who loves to be in front of the camera, which is why even being on this panel is a step forward. So I think my husband is very fearless in that kind of aspect. So is on social media a lot. So he just was very much more like vocal about what he does. So I think that for a while it kind of felt like no matter how hard the energy that I put in, it wasn't being recognized to the same level because I wasn't out there being like, look at me, like, look at what I've done. And I think over the last 5 years, there has been sort of a shift where I've begun to understand that it's been really amazing to have other female producers behind me and sort of encourage me to step into the light more, I guess, if that makes sense. Although I maintain that I don't think it should necessarily be a thing that you have to do in order to be recognized. I think that the work should be enough. But I do think that over the last 5 years, the fact that I am a woman has been an interesting, different perspective, especially for a project like with Regina King, where I think that both of us were able to have such a great relationship because we came from a similar place about being a woman of color and working through this industry.
I think that I want to come back to that because I have a lot to say about women needing to promote themselves. And I don't mean being self-promoters. I mean stepping into the light, as you say. I think that's such a beautiful way of putting it. And I also feel like what you said, it ties into the first question I asked about, there's all these women. Well, the women have always been there. It's just suddenly now people are actually paying attention, right? So it's on the one hand, it's great. On the other hand, it's like, hey guys, where has everybody been for the last 20 years? We've all been here toiling and doing our work, and just now people are finally recognizing it. But I want to also hear on this question from Christina and Molly. Have you noticed anything different in your career in the last few years?
Well, I produced Okja with Bong Joon-ho for Netflix, and I think for me that was like a weird moment of being like, am I just on this because I'm Korean or something, and having to kind of deal with that. But in a weird way, obviously it really helped launch launched me into this new level of producing. And I think in terms of kind of like this idea of women pushing other women, I worked under Dee Dee Gardner for like the longest time at Plan B, or you know, and Jeremy has been incredibly like a huge mentor as well. But I do think this idea of like not wanting to be in the spotlight is very much, I don't know, Jessica, if you feel this way, but I think as an Asian woman especially, I'm very like,
I feel you.
like being actually here today is like shocking that I'm not like bleh. But
No.
this idea that yeah, we need to like put ourselves kind of out, the fact that we do need to put ourselves out there in order to kind of get ahead, I think is this newfound thing that I personally am kind of like grappling with. For me, I think I find solace in the work behind, like producing behind the camera. Like I can just put my head down and really focus on the work, which is something that, you know, has been taught to me and I've taken pride in. Like, you don't care about anything else except the art. And that's something that, you know, I had really great partners and a support system that allowed me to do that without feeling like incredibly that sort of outside pressure. Of course, like when I step outside or on other people's sets, like it's a ton of men, ton of white men. There's, you know, no, I'm not saying that's bad, but I just think I do notice the shift. And I do think like a lot of the content that's coming out that's produced by women of color, like there's a new level of depth, I feel like, whether it's an emotional level of storytelling or some sort of you know, in Borat, especially with that feminism kind of storyline, there's like new things that are coming out because we are allowing ourselves to kind of take that step forward and bring that lens to stuff. So in that sense, I think it's like incredible. I'm like super thrilled to be a part of this and a part of this new wave. But I, you know, if I definitely am very grateful for like the kind of support I had behind me and helping me kind of like push me out there a little bit.
That's so well put. And I do want to come back to that. So Mollye, have you noticed anything?
Well, I feel like I've been kind of like head down working, and like all of you guys have, that I don't know if I actually really have necessarily noticed as to a change as in perception, I guess, of myself as a producer, but the fact that the work is being acknowledged, I think, is showing a difference. And I think that, you know, I feel like women often make riskier films, but in the sense they're not riskier, they're just that they're what's of interest to us. And now the world is saying, yeah, we like that too, and the gatekeepers are like, oh gosh, why weren't we listening before? But I did have a friend actually recently say to me, like now at this stage with what's happening with Nomadland, you got to like go in there and like, well, he used a term that I probably shouldn't use, but you know, wave something around. and
your money maker.
yeah. And I said, like, so basically, like, you're telling me to like act like a man. And he's like, yes. And I don't know if I'll ever be able to do that. And I hope that there's a way that we can, or I can find a way of asserting and using the platform that I have now, at least, to succeed, but without necessarily in the same way.
I think that's such I love what you said about you're being encouraged to do it like a man. And one of the things that I think is so amazing is that every one of you have had significant female support in your career. And whether it's mentorship, whether it's partnership, whether it's a relationship with a filmmaker or an actress on your projects. And that sense of community is such an important component, I think, to women rising together and sort of claiming their place, because that is something men just sort of inherently do better, you know, whether it's the networking, the bro thing, the bro vacations, the whatever the case may be. Women don't do that as much. And this idea of we keep our heads down and we don't want to draw the limelight. But at a certain point in time, we have to find the way, and as you all are, find the way to have that conversation on our own behalf. I mean, Monica, you and I've talked about this a lot when it comes to Borat subsequent movie film. And, you know, you've had a very supportive partner, writer, director, star who has, you know, put you out there with him when it would have been really easy to just talk about Sacha Baron Cohen, you know?
Right.
So, you know, what has that been like for you in terms of sort of finally getting the recognition after 16 years of working with Sacha?
Well, I think Sasha has always been super respectful of me, and uh, you know, I think I worked well with him, which is why I did 3 movies with him. You know, I did the first Borat and Bruno, and then this one. But you know, I think what's interesting is I think back to 10 years ago, and I remember being in a meeting. It was all men. This was not a Sasha project, but it was all men, and I had an opinion on something. It was a marketing meeting, and they wanted to shut me up. They did not want my opinion. They didn't feel that it was valued, and so they shut me up when I said I've been talking to other people about what this means, and they came back and said, "So who have you been talking to? Your Oprah's book club?" And I remember just the room laughing. There was 10 white men all sitting in a room, all laughing. I may have been slightly older than most of them. And it just put me, you know, it sidelined me completely. And I think to not just Borat, but I think about the other movie that I had that came out this year called Wander Darkly. And it was a female writer director and 4 women producers all working together. We all deserved that seat at the table, and nobody was sidelined. And I just think of like those experiences that I'm so glad that we've moved on from. And I know how to, you know, I also know how to pick and choose my projects now, because I'm not going to put myself in a position where it was, you know, from that movie. I will work with people that value me and that I value working with.
It's really, really well put. The choice of who you decide to partner with practically and creatively. So that's another good segue. Another good segue. So Mollye, you worked with Chloe before. How did you two connect, and how were you able to sort of form this really productive partnership?
We connected in film school. We went to NYU grad film together. And so I think we originally just connected as people, as friends, and our love of Wong Kar-wai. And then, you know, as far as then working together, I think we saw in each other a similar quality of, if someone says no, we say that, like, there is no, we're going to find a way to make something happen.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just, I think was really like the kind of kernel of our partnership, and also just a curiosity about worlds that are not our own, and people that we wouldn't necessarily have met living in our you know, New York little bubbles.
Mm-hmm. And how, you know, how was it that you guys decided on Nomadland to combine Fran, who's so brilliant, with these non-actors, and, you know, the level of trust you must have had in them to be able to deliver those performances?
The decision was really, I mean, automatically when Peter Spears and Frances McDormand came to Chloe with the book Nomadland. They actually originally thought that she would make that Frances would play Linda May, the character, and because in the book it's very much she's the one that has like this narrative arc, and Chloe was the one that said, no, actually I want to kind of do this the way that I've done my other projects, and I want Linda May to play Linda May. And so, you know, that was really how that began. But then the way that we work with non-actors, I feel funny saying non-actors because they really are acting, is there's a trust that's built from the very beginning, and it comes from listening and being really, really caring about what they have to say and them telling their own stories. And then on that same sense of like Frances also putting some of herself into it too. So there was this sense that everybody was giving of themselves, of their own personal private selves.
It's so compelling. I mean, it's so seamless the way you guys accomplish that. It's really a testament to the vision that you guys had. Pivoting just a little bit, let's talk a little bit, Christina, about Minari, which is also, obviously inspired by real people, real events. You know, you guys, you've spoken about why you guys felt it was really important to shoot in Tulsa, right? And it's always easy for people to say, yeah, why not go to Atlanta? Yeah, why not go to New Orleans? Like no one will know the difference, right? A field is a field, a farmhouse is a farmhouse. So, how were you able to convince everybody, investors, et cetera, and why was it so important to you guys to hold true to that vision?
Well, the story takes place in Arkansas, but I don't know if you've ever been to Arkansas. There's not much of a film crew base there, so that was going to be a little difficult. So we originally were going to do, we were starting to prep it for Atlanta, but right around that time is when all the Heartbeat stuff came out, and when you're kind of in this position, I do think we felt, and A24 was supportive of this as well, that if we have the power to do it, or not do it, then let's not do it. And so, the other place was Oklahoma, where they, have different laws, and it's the state next to Arkansas. And when we looked on the map, Tulsa is like an hour and a half away from where the story actually takes place. And we were like, I remember being in a prep meeting where we're trying to convince them to let us shoot in Tulsa, and they're like, well, can you shoot in Oklahoma City, because there's a much larger film base there? And we like brought up like topographical maps, and it's very much like it's green, and as soon as you pass Tulsa, it's like brown. And like that just wouldn't have, it would have been so difficult. And it was like, in the long run, trust us, this is gonna be much better. And we're very grateful that it ended up working out.
Oh, it was beautiful. And I really respect your guys' decision to stick to your guns on moving out of Atlanta. I find that it's really hard to do that, right? When you have, pressure to bear when it comes to getting any movie made and wanting to make the financier feel good and to be able to take that stand. That's really fantastic. So kudos to you guys. Okay, Lyn, let's talk about Jingle Jangle, which honestly, I was so blown away. First of all, I am a huge musical person. You don't know me at all, but Monica does. My parents met on Broadway. I know every single musical that is out there. My 19-year-old son right now is taking a course in musical theater in college, and I'm watching every movie with him, and he's like mortified. But I thought that was such an extraordinary movie and was so happy that it got made, because it's so imaginative and it's so original, and it's also perennial. That's a movie that everyone now is going to start watching every year on Netflix. And talk a little bit about that journey, because you started to talk about it a little bit, but you said, 20 years to get made. How did it get evolved from its origins as a stage musical to ultimately finding its way to Netflix? And what were some of the factors that made Netflix say, okay, we're in?
Well, that's awesome about your son, by the way. So as you know, it was going to be a Broadway, musical. That was the origination of it. And one day, as we continued to work on it, it was pulling the music together. It was, building this world out. That's kind of what was taking the time. But then trying to create that stage play, it's just started getting a little bit more difficult. And finally, one day I just said to my husband, David, who wrote and directed it. So Jess, I feel you over there. Why don't we just make it a movie and then do the stage play? And so then we have no limitations. And so from there, it was like, boom, the creativity just exploded. And being able to, we're huge fans of for me, Annie and Mary Poppins, and my husband's Chitty 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 Bang Bang, that's his favorite. Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. And the whole thing behind it was, we love these films growing up and even now. And when we had our son, there was nothing that was representative of him. He has on his wall Miles Morales and Black Panther, and my husband David tried to get him to watch Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, which is his favorite, and my husband's all singing the song and everything, and my son's looking at him like, can I go play my Legos, And that's when it really hit him, like, we have to get this made. We have to show him that he can fly and that he can be in this magical, mystical world. And that was, after having him, he's 8 now, that really just took us there to push. And the thing with Netflix is we did a film with them called El Camino Christmas with Ted Melfi. And that was such a great experience. It was the first time we were actually brought onto a project that David didn't write. And so I was producing that and David was directing. And again, it was a great experience. So when they brought David in the room to talk about, we love this experience, what other projects? He's like, well, what do you want to do? They're like, well, we want to do big ideas. He's like, I have a big idea. And he said, every year we sit down with our family and we want to watch a holiday film, but there's nothing that's representative of us. And we think that it's time. And he told them about Jingle Jangle, Scott Stuber and Nick Nesbitt. And Scott said, I never thought of it that way, that you don't have something that is representative of you, that's a perennial like that. And he said, and they bought it in the room. And like, when does that happen? And on top of that, they said, don't write budget, write your imagination. Wow. So I was like, huh? So from there, it's just like the support. And to, as Jess was saying, which I completely relate to, and I'm sure many women do, when you are the wife of a director, he's the writer, director, produces as well, you are looked at as a +1. It's like a buy one, get one free situation. And it shouldn't be that way. And we shouldn't be punished for being married to, one of the people on set or the person whose vision we're trying to push. And I always have to say, I felt that way until I made Jingle Jangle, because I felt the shift in myself, probably just getting older and everything. And at the same time, how much this meant. It's like I was Journey and I wanted to make not only things possible for her and for other boys and girls to see that, but also for myself and what it meant to be a part of something like this. Because I knew that if we didn't get it right, then someone may not get the chance to do this again anytime soon. It may take another 20 years. So there was so much pressure and layering behind it on the passion of what it meant to me and what it meant to make it and what it would mean to so many people. And the thing that I just really love about, all of your films is that the themes are universal, but I love most the specificity of it. Like, where it is these particular women or, it is this certain family in MINARI and in One Night in Miami. And that's the thing that I feel make these films so special, is that these themes are universal, love and hope and forgiveness and all of that. But it's the specificity that is what makes it so special, that they are from a certain country or they're, certain people of color and all of those things, so that we can share what those experiences mean. So again, for me, this has been such an amazing passion project, and I just wanted to be sure to layer all those specificities with the African fabrics, with the natural hair, normalizing natural hair, which we all know has been an issue with the Crown Act and all of these different things, and just showing the beauty of it all and the fun and the love and light of it all. And that's what it was, for me.
Well, you certainly achieved it. And you said something, audacity, be audacious. And I think that's something that's true of all the movies you guys have made this year. There's an audacity to every single one of them. I also think I was really struck by what you said about feeling the pressure of this movie succeeding, because if for some reason it wasn't perceived as successful or good or whatever it would be another 20 years before another potentially another Black director or writer director had the opportunity to make a movie like this. And that's such unfair pressure. You know, we can all think of plenty of white male filmmakers who make enormous flops and then just go and do it again. And, you know, but with women and particularly persons of color, you get that shot and then you better make it work or else, right? And there's such a double standard that I really hope is starting to move, because the pressure you should be feeling, I would think, would be about making it good, not the legacy of it as to whether or not it's going to be good enough to justify another one. That's a really, that's a big burden. And I'm sorry you had to carry that, but I think we would all say you guys succeeded. So congratulations on that.
Thank you.
Okay, Jess, let's talk about One Night in Miami and how that whole thing came together. And I was saying to you earlier that my 19-year-old music loving son is now singing Sam Cooke songs. So how did that all happen? How did you find your way to the material, to Regina? Talk a little bit about how that all came together, because again, talking about audacity, it's audacious to say, I'm going to back this actress as a filmmaker, and she's actually not going to be in the movie, right? I can see those conversations, which is like, well, is there a role for her? And it's like, no, she's really just going to be the director, you know? So talk a little bit about how that came together.
Well, the journey of One Night in Miami began about 7 years ago. It began as a play in Los Angeles in a tiny little theater called Rogue Machine. And
oh, did we lose her?
Am I here?
Wait, are you there, Jess? Wait, turn off your just turn off your camera and maybe that'll help with the connection. I find that sometimes Jess is on location, you guys. So we're gonna cut her slack because she's in a trailer on location. All right, so try it now.
Is that better?
A little bit, yeah.
I think just cut your camera off, Jess, and
Yeah,
then
turn
talk.
off your camera and just talk. Because sometimes the camera pulls the bandwidth. Okay.
Oh no, I prefer that anyway. So great.
Yeah, that's great. We can hear you perfectly now.
Okay, great. A friend of mine reached out and said that his friend was playing Malcolm X in this tiny play at the Rogue Machine Theater in Los Angeles. It was one of those days where I'm sure we've all had, where you're sort of in a bad mood. It's been a bad day, and the last thing you want to do is travel all the way across Los Angeles to go watch a play by a first-time playwright. But within the first 5 minutes, I would say, of watching that play, I was so completely moved. And by the end, there was tears streaming down. And all I knew was that I had to find out who wrote that and who, and if there was a way that I could talk him into figuring out a way to translate what he had just done on stage onto screen, because I felt strongly that millions of people needed to watch this story. So we spoke to Kemp, who at that time, it was his first play, and he had essentially said that, like, well, I wrote this play and it was full of Sam Cooke music, and I just figured if it didn't work and it wasn't a success, the Sam Cooke estate would never have to know. So no worries about that. But then if it did work, that maybe they would love it enough to not be upset that I sort of put on this play without the actual rights. So what happened is Jody Klein from APCO did hear about it, because the play is amazing, and he flew down, and he initially came down to, I think, an attempt to shut it down, but instead was so moved as well by the words that he decided that he wanted to get involved with the play. So he actually had the rights ahead of me. So we then spent the next 5 years stalking the play. I think I flew across to London and I showed up there and I was like, "Hi, it's me again. Still really want to be involved." Flew to Miami again and was like, "Please, please, please." And it wasn't until I made a movie called Blind Spotting, and where Jodie and Kemp both saw it, and I think they were as moved by that movie as I was by that original play, and they decided that me and my husband Keith would be the perfect partners for the play, turning it into a movie. And so we began the process of adapting it, and it was very deliberate on all of our parts because the play initially takes place all in one room. What is the most organic way to tell the story in a cinematic way without it feeling forced that we had to like open it up. And one of the things that we decided was that it would be great to sort of do a prologue where you sort of have the we show each of these great men at sort of a turning point within their lives, and then sort of show that their friendship was the catalyst for change. And then Kemp was really excited about that take, and he turned in a draft, and it was beautiful and emotional. And around that time, we were watching the Golden Globes, and the most incredible Regina King came on stage and won for Beale Street, and she commanded the whole audience and was audacious in a plea to all of us and saying that we needed to do better. And in that moment, I think all of us knew that like there was no better human being to tell this story than this fearless leader that we saw on stage in that moment. And just like a weird fluke of timing, she at that time was also looking to direct for the first time for a feature, and she had wanted it to be a period film. Initially, she had thought it would be a love story, but when she read this, she began to see that it was in fact kind of a different kind of love story, and that it was in her words, a love letter to Black men everywhere. And she, I think, was as drawn to the story as we were, and she was kind enough to fit us in to her crazy awards, circuit. And I think within the first hour of our meeting, we all just were like, "This is it, this is it." And that's sort of a very long, rambling story of how One Night in Miami came to be.
Wow, that's great. That's such a great story. Sort of chasing, being again audacity, chasing and sort of demonstrating, the worthiness of the producer. That is like producer 101, right? And did you feel like they needed to see your other film before, because it was just they hadn't done this before, they didn't know you, or like was it a function of like, well, are there other producers with more credits? Like, what do you think was the thing that changed, that the movie changed for them?
Well, I think up until that point, and I've talked about this before, I was the content that I was making was very different. I think that we were trying to I was known mainly for genre work. And I will always say that like every film that I've ever made, if you watch it and are looking for it, you will see that there is a common theme of, and this is going to sound really corny, but it's an attempt to try to make the world a better place. But I think that in the genre films, like you could watch one of my films and just appreciate it as like, oh, it's a fun horror film, or you could watch it and realize that it's actually a story about PTSD for soldiers that have come back from Afghanistan. It's just it's about perspective. And I think that for the rights holders of the play, that when they saw blind spotting, it's the first film that I had made post Trump being elected, where it was very important to me that I make a change and that make it really clear that every piece of content that I put out since then is very obvious in what it's trying to do, that I wasn't relying on subtext quite so much. It was much more like screaming, like we need change and we need it now. And I think that film really spoke to how I was feeling, and I think how lots of people in America feel and probably continue to feel, even though he is no longer.
No question. And I think thematically, it's such an interesting parallel because it may not align genre-wise, but message-wise, it is relevant to what One Night in Miami ultimately stands for. So that's such a great story. Okay, I'm gonna pivot to a COVID question, a COVID conversation, because all of you have the great good fortune of having to finish, distribute, promote your movies in a pandemic. So I'm going to ask each one of you to talk a little bit about when you realized you had to pivot, how you pivoted. You know, were there things that you, in the new normal, that you feel like maybe in the long run could be better in what you do, or things where you're like, you know, this is a one-off, I would never want to do that again. So I'm gonna just start with Monica, just because you're right next to me on my screen. So.
Well, we were mid-movie for Borat. Wander Darkly was
done with Wander Darkly, right? You were finished.
Wander Darkly actually had premiered at Sundance, so that was much like Minari did last year, and so we were, you know, just going off on our path, and that was an easier thing to finish and get out there. Obviously, distributing during this year was just wonky because you don't know what the date is. You don't know how people are going to see their content, trying to get numbers that you may have been striving for. All of that is just, you know, we've all gone through it. So, but with Borat, we were mid-shoot. So we knew that we had to finish the storyline, and we knew the story points that we needed to get, but because of the docu-style nature of the film, we really had to change how we were going to get those story points and change the story. So creatively, we had to take a big pivot, which I know is the word of the year. But, you know, we were really in a place where at first we were like, this is going to be short. You know, I mean, I keep saying it's sort of the stages of grief. You know, we started with denial and, you know, went through everything until acceptance. And, you know, we just said, no, we're going to be able to go out. And we really wanted to get the movie out before the election. That was why we set forth to make the movie. And then to not have it done before the election it was unacceptable. So, you know, much like you said, Molly, there's no, you know, we don't say no. And at a certain point, Sasha kept calling, you know, literally every day, like, are we going to make it? Are we going to make it? And at a certain point, I was like, I don't think we will. Like, we have to start. And so the industry wasn't catching up yet. We were very much on the cusp of speaking to everybody at Johns Hopkins, and we had an entire team of people that were helping us get back on the road and do it safely. So not only did we have to change the story, but then we had to go forth and try to come up with our own rules because the union rules hadn't come out yet. So we basically set a date, and we had to, you know, I'll fast forward through all the craziness that happened, you know, to get to the end of shooting, but we finished shooting September 5th, and we had to release October 23rd. So delivery was about 4 weeks later, and we had to score, put new songs together, you know, record things in Romania. We were screening in New Zealand. We were scoring in Austria. We were editing in the UK and here. We were everything to finish it up and make it all happen. So it was a very arduous process where we never slept, and we got it done. But it was definitely an interesting, I don't know that I never want to do that again. I love challenges. I think we all love challenges. That's why we do this job. But it was a little more challenging than I would like to see.
Learning to do post in 4 weeks. Molly, was there any material impact for you guys?
Yeah, Well, we made the film in 2018 production, and then we paused, and Chloe went and shot the Eternals, and which I think was sort of a blessing for her, though, to take some time away from the film and doing something so drastically different, and then to have the comfort of coming back to Nomadland. And I think, and so because Eternals went on their own hiatus because of the pandemic, Chloe then just could put all of her concentration on the edit, and so because she ultimately, you know, edited the whole film, and so in that sense, like, we did get, there was there was a little bit of like light there in the tunnel, because we got her fully, but of course, you know, everything that you're doing in post is like, you know, 10 steps more when there's COVID, and everything takes longer. Simplest things take longer. I actually had 2 films in post during this time, and they picture locked like 3 days um, after each other. And that's like I think the hardest thing of not being with the creatives, you know, like the creatives not getting to be together in the same room is really tough. But then, you know, I think as producers, we were right away thinking, okay, like, this is, of course, we were optimistic, but then as things were going, we were like, we need to have a plan here. Like, what's happening? We need to, and, you know, I remember Chloe at one point saying, like, we've done everything, so we do things so non-traditionally anyway. Like, let's embrace that, you know, let's release it not traditionally. Let's, you know, and I think that Searchlight, you know, has done that and did that with the festival premiere, and finding a way for it to premiere at these 3 festivals. And then, you know, ultimately, like, while we would love for people to really see the film in theaters, I think there's been a democratization in a sense of like it going out right away online, and so people who so everyone can see it, you know, at the same time. And I think that is kind of in line with the ethos of the film. But this is definitely one challenge I would never want to ever have again, because I feel like it's
Glad
not
I did it.
conducive
Don't
at
need to
all
do it ever again.
not conducive at all to
My
what
advice
movie
is
should be
don't do
about.
it. Christina, did you guys have any material impact from COVID?
I'm very much in Molly's camp of never wanting to do this again. And I mean, currently in production, I don't want to do this anymore. You know, I think it's very similar to what Monica and Molly was saying, like this, you kind of, we heard in March, you know, it was post Sundance, we just did all this stuff and we were like, okay, what next? And we were all really excited. And then kind of March rolled around and we were like, I definitely, when we decided to not go into the office anymore that week, I'm sure everyone had that week. I honestly was like, this is gonna be like a 2-week thing. Like, I'll see you guys in 2 weeks. Assistants, like, have a good 2 weeks off. And then it was like, oh, okay. And I think by the time the end of summer kind of rolled around, I think we held out hope of some sort of theatrical release for much of the summer, and then it became pretty clear that it wasn't going to be a tenable situation. So you know, A24 has been really supportive in trying to figure out how to eventize a release for people in their living room. So you know, they created like a streaming platform and all that good stuff, and then VOD, I think, or PVOD. I do think it's really great. As Molly said, like a ton of people, you know, maybe who wouldn't have been able to go see it are now going to get to see it. But yeah, I don't think I would want to do this again. The one upside is you don't have to go anywhere for press, and you don't have to attend like the millions of parties, and like not that I don't love doing that, but I think the little introvert in me is like it's not totally my jam, but that's been like a weird upside. But I do miss like hanging out. Like, it'd be so cool if we were all like
right
out together. So in that sense, it's been kind of a bummer. The last bummer is I remember watching a cut of the film when we were in post, and thinking like, oh, okay, this is like we made something really cool, I think. And then a few weeks later, we screened another cut, but we actually watched it in a screening room, like on a theater. In a, it's not quite as big as a theater, but a proper screening room. And I gotta say, I think the thing that pains me the most is like people not being able to experience that sort of. I think as an artist, you're like, there really is a difference. The sound and the like, I just really feel bad for some of our actors, because on like a 70-inch, even a 70-inch screen, you're like, oh, their performances are really great, but there's just some people that when you're watching them on a huge theater screen, like, it just, the subtle nuances and the subtleties of their performances are just so, it's just so beautiful to watch. And it kind of bums me out that people won't get to experience that, but at least people are getting to experience it. So for that, I'm grateful.
Wow, that's such an interesting, it's such an interesting observation, because it was, with the exception, I think, Lyn, of you, right? You knew you were making a movie for a streamer. And so you got all, I mean, I didn't feel, I can only imagine what that movie would feel like on a big screen, because there's so much to see in every frame.
Yeah, that was the whole idea. It was supposed to be released in theaters first.
Oh, it was. So that was a pivot. That was a pivot for you guys as well.
It was a huge pivot, because that was the whole thing. It was like, it's their first live action musical. We were supposed to be in all these theaters internationally. It was supposed to be a really big thing. And for us, like, our first time kind of being in this world beyond, just the whole music of it all, finally putting everything we've ever done into one film. I was cursing and I was kicking and I was like, oh my gosh, we finally did it, 20 years, and it's been reduced to, on the flip side, thinking of the good side, as I would have to explain to my son, it was very necessary with everything that was going on, the social unrest and everything. We all needed something like Jingle Jangle at this time.
For sure.
That, I was grateful that people were able to turn on something like that, with everything going on. But to try to score, the orchestras in London, we're here, we've got sound on one computer, we've got picture on another, they can't get together, so we're having to do strings and then drums, and then it was insane. And then how you saw that storybook, the visual effects and the CGI, we were supposed to go do some additional photography with Felicia Rashad to put in a little bit more narration to explain the story. And literally, that's when all the rumblings start happening, and Felicia being a woman of a certain age, I was like, no way, I'm not taking that chance.
Sure.
Sending her, us going to London, and I had to call her, and she's like, I'm ready to go. What do you mean? Let's do nothing, And so I'm like, Felicia, Miss Rashad, like, no, I would never forgive myself if something happened. And so with that, but we expanded that whole storybook element of the CGI and visual effects, and that became a whole new creative direction that we took. But I, to be in a place like this, to be able to speak with producers like you, it's like I wouldn't have had the opportunity if it wasn't for this film. So I missed experiencing all of those things that could have been by doing a film like this. So I was like, dang it. But
well, you're here, you're virtually here with all of us. And, it's, I would bet that you'll get a theatrical release this year. I bet that they'll put it back out, because
that's what I think. I'm like, you gotta see this in a big.
Yeah, I would bet.
And that's what I'm going to push for.
Yeah, you should. And and it's interesting. And Jessica, I want to hear what you have to say. It's interesting that all of you have said that creative ingenuity has come out of COVID. Chloe got to go back to the movie in a way that she might not have been able to, because she would have been still sort of doing something on Eternals, but instead they shut down and she had the time. And, Lyn, you were saying that you had to pivot story-wise, and I know Monica had to pivot story-wise, because you couldn't, certain things you had planned you couldn't do. So it's interesting how the circumstances forced ingenuity, which is great. So Jessica, last but not least, did you have any material impact from the COVID of it all?
Yeah. I mean, I second what everyone's saying, that like I wouldn't wish a shooting through this pandemic on anybody, but yet it's all I've been doing. We finished principal in theory end of February, but we owed three days, and those 3 days were supposed to be this sort of incredible Fontainebleau lobby scene, which included Sam Cooke and his wife walking through that like a sea of white, of and being, you know, very much not belonging, and that was, you know, an important beat that we all thought that we needed. But unfortunately, you know, we were supposed to come back to LA and shoot that in March. And of course, we all know what happened in March. And we sort of went on hold for a while. And I'm not sure entirely what the case is with everybody else on this panel, but my film at the time, we didn't have distribution. So it was very much a moment of all of us being like, oh shit, but what's gonna happen, you know, what should we do, and should we ride this out? Is it going to be a couple weeks? Is it not going to be? It's a timeless story. Should we rush to, I mean, like, does it make sense to try to shoot this now, or should we wait until this is over? Is it ever going to be over? But obviously what ended up occurring is that the George Floyd murders really just and energized us all in a different way. And so me, Regina, Keith, and Jody had a phone call in end of May, where we decided that the story was so urgent that even though production hadn't started back up yet, that it was imperative that we get back to work. And at the time when we started, I don't know if this is the same time range as you, Monica, but it was end of June. We were told by the SAG rep that we were the biggest show to start up again. So we had like a cast and crew of 200.
Wow.
And we were told like at the top of every day, like, if anything goes wrong on the shoot, then the industry will never recover, because you will be proof that you can't shoot during a pandemic. So all eyes are on you. And so there was just immense amount of pressure. But it was also the closest that I ever felt to everybody on my cast and crew, because they all rallied all together. And similarly, you know, we ended up not doing that Fontainebleau lobby scene, but instead we turned it into a really intimate scene with Sam Cooke and his wife, and it's become one of my favorite scenes in the film. And you know, about a week after we wrapped that, we showcased 20 minutes of footage, and we were very lucky that we attracted the amazing Amazon, and they came on board. And even though, like everyone is saying, it's not the way we initially thought that the film would come out, just the idea that it could come out globally, and millions of people could see it at once, was, you know, such a bright spot during what was a time of social unrest.
Wow, that's amazing. Okay, we have 2 minutes, and I'm going to get one question in that came from our audience, and I'm going to have you guys try and give us like your sort of short elevator pitch for how to answer this question, because I think it's a great question for women producers, because we tend to have to deal with this. What is your approach to troubleshooting and problem solving on set when you're under lots of pressure? And this person who asked it is a young woman of color producer. But what is your guys' sort of go-to piece of advice that you tell yourself, or you remind yourself as being a woman on a set that's predominantly male? And I'll start with you, Mollye.
I have not actually been on a film set that's predominantly male, but
even better. There's the answer. Don't hire mostly women.
That's exactly the answer. I was going to say something else, but I'm going to say, well, I was going to say like just that breathe and think of all possible outcomes. But yeah, hire more women.
Hire women. Christina?
I would say respond versus react. I think that's been a huge thing for me. I think every situation that sometimes you encounter, there's an immediate reaction that comes up inside you. But I think it, you know, as Molly says, sometimes it's better to take a breath and assess the situation fully and respond to it versus, you know, just kind of having some sort of um, reaction, which, you know, as women, obviously, any sort of reaction gets then taken way out of context that we're crazy or whatever. So I think for me, that bit of advice and that's something that I really try to, you know, do on set.
That's outstanding advice. Lynn, do you have a go-to?
Mine is honesty with love and light. You know, it's telling the truth, getting to the point, but hey, a smile and and with a little love, it always seems to make it seem better. And I'm also dealing with, you know, my husband and creative and that kind of thing. So then it adds another layer that sometimes I go eat a couple extra biscuits afterwards for, but but I feel like that's always the best way, just being upbeat and positive, because we all want the same thing most of the time. And if they don't, then those people kind of weed themselves out of the situation. So yeah.
I love that. Where did Jess? Jess, what's your go-to? Oh, I think Jess, you're on mute. So Monica, what's your go-to?
I echo everything that everybody's been saying. And I also think just be authentic to yourself, because you can't fake it. You know, you have to be you. And, you know, be open to hearing everybody out, because that's how you're going to make those decisions and figure out the way out of that situation.
And Jessica, what's your advice for decision making?
Not great.
For Jess, I think we've lost you, Jess. I think we're out of time. It's 7:01. We could stay here for all night, and I know these ladies are all very busy. So I want to thank again Mollye Asher, Lyn Sisson-Talbert, Monica Levinson, Christina Oh, and Jessica Wu Calder. Thank you guys so much for participating in this panel tonight, especially those of you who are on location. It really means a lot to the organization, to Variety, and most importantly to our audience. So thank you very much. Good luck with the movies you're working on. And hopefully we'll see you all in person very soon.
Thanks for having me.